Hello, everyone. He owned a $5 million mansion, a life of wealth and control, but his obsession would cost his wife and daughter everything. Secrets festered behind closed doors, and the walls themselves remembered the betrayals. Watch till the end to uncover the shocking truth of wealth, manipulation, and a husband's ultimate downfall, and see how far someone will go to protect their empire. The man who owned everything he always believed ownership was a form of immortality. The mansion proved it. $5 million of stone, glass, and carefully selected silence sat on the cliff like a monument carved in his own image. The iron gates bore his initials. The driveway curved deliberately, forcing visitors to slow, to look up, to understand where they were. Even now, standing in the foyer with the morning light bleeding through floor-to-ceiling windows, he felt the old satisfaction hum beneath his skin. This house had bent itself around him. It had learned his footsteps, it had memorized his voice, and yet on the marble console table, folded with insulting neatness, lay the eviction notice. He did not touch it at first. Touching it would make it real. Instead, he adjusted his cufflinks, though he was not going anywhere. A man like him did not panic. Panic was for men who had never owned anything worth losing. He straightened the collar of his pressed shirt and studied his reflection in the hallway mirror. Silver at the temples, yes, but dignified, powerful, a face that investors trusted. A face neighbors envied. A face that still belonged on magazine covers and charity brochures. This was a misunderstanding, a delay, a temporary imbalance. That was how these things happened. He had built an empire from nothing. No, not nothing. From intelligence, from instinct, from a refusal to be small. People like to forget that part. They saw the results and assumed luck, inheritance, privilege. They never saw the nights he stayed awake calculating risk, the mornings he crushed competitors with a handshake and a smile. Control was not cruelty, it was discipline. He walked through the living room, shoes echoing against polished stone. The furniture had already been partially removed. White outlines marked where art once hung. The emptiness irritated him more than the notice. Empty space suggested absence. Absence suggested weakness. He opened the envelope at last. The words were clinical, efficient, merciless. Legal language stripped of emotion like a blade cleaned after use. Dates, amounts, a final deadline. He skimmed it once, then again, jaw tightening as if the paper itself were lying. He knew every number already. He had memorized them the way some men memorized prayers. Outside, the ocean was calm. Of course it was. Nature had no respect for humiliation. He folded the notice precisely and placed it back where it had been, aligning it with the edge of the table. If anyone came in, and they would, he did not want it looking disturbed. Appearances mattered. They always had. Footsteps sounded above him, faint, cautious, the upper floor settling into morning. He did not look up. His wife moved through the house like a ghost now, quiet, careful, as if noise itself might provoke something. He had noticed it months ago but refused to name it. Naming things gave them power. She lingered in doorways, watched him when she thought he wasn't paying attention, spoke in sentences that never quite finished. There was a way she held her breath when he entered a room, a fraction of a second too long. It irritated him. He had given her everything. This house. Security. A life insulated from the smallness other women endured. Gratitude should have been effortless. Instead, she had grown distant. Suspicious, even. As if she sensed the ground shifting beneath them and dared to believe it might be his fault. He told himself it was nerves. Women worried. That was what they did. Especially when they were allowed too much time to think. He crossed into his study, the one room that still felt fully intact. Dark wood shelves rose from floor to ceiling, heavy with books he rarely read but liked owning. Leather chairs faced each other near the fireplace, arranged for conversations that bent toward agreement. His desk sat immaculate, save for a single unopened folder and his phone, face down. He sat slowly, exhaling through his nose. The folder held the rest of it, the debts, the lawsuits. The carefully delayed consequences. He had not opened it in 3 days. He didn't need to. The numbers hadn't changed. Only the pressure had. His phone buzzed once. He ignored it. For years, men had come to him for guidance. Younger men, hungrier men. They asked how to build something that lasted. He always told them the same thing: never let them see you doubt. Doubt invited attack. Doubt made you negotiable. He had never doubted himself. Even now, he told himself this was recoverable. A narrative problem, not a financial one. The right explanation, the right silence, and the story would shift. It always did. People wanted to believe in him. They needed someone solid to orbit. What they could never know was how close the walls were closing. A sound from the hallway, a door opening, then stopping. He knew without looking that his wife stood there, just outside the study. She had done this before, hovered, hesitated, as if deciding whether to speak was a dangerous act. "What?" he said sharply. A pause. He could picture her fingers curling into her palm. "There are men outside," she said finally. "They're near the gate." He didn't ask which men, he knew. "They're early," he said. "I told them not to come until Monday." Another pause. He imagined her swallowing. "They said today," she replied. "They said it was final." He stood abruptly, chair scraping the floor. The sound echoed louder than he intended. He hated that. Noise was a loss of control. "They don't set the timeline," he said. "I do." She said nothing. Silence again, her favorite weapon. He moved past her without looking, down the hallway toward the front windows. Outside, 2 vehicles idled near the gate. Dark, unmarked, practical. The kind of cars men drove when they didn't want to be remembered. Anger flared, hot and immediate. Not fear. Anger, this was disrespect. "They're not coming in," he said. "I'll handle it." Behind him, he felt her presence shrink. She always did when his voice took that tone. He had learned long ago that volume wasn't necessary. Certainty did the work. He stepped onto the terrace and inhaled deeply. Salt air. Expensive landscaping. The kind of view that convinced people they had arrived somewhere important. His phone buzzed again. This time he checked it. A message from a number he didn't recognize, though he knew exactly who it belonged to. "We need to talk. Today." He deleted it without responding. There were rules to survival. One of them was knowing when to cut off communication. He had taught that lesson to others often. It was unpleasant having it applied to him. From the corner of his eye, he saw movement inside, small, quick. His daughter passing the staircase. He barely registered her. Children absorbed tension without understanding it. They adapted. That was their strength. She would be fine. She had his blood. She would learn. He turned back toward the house, already planning his next call, his next version of events. He would frame this as restructuring, as strategy, as a temporary retreat before resurgence. People loved comebacks. Inside, the air felt heavier. His wife stood near the kitchen island now, hands braced against the stone. She looked smaller there, reduced by the scale of the space. He remembered when she used to fill rooms, laugh too loudly, ask too many questions. Somewhere along the way, she had learned quiet. "You should pack," she said. "At least some things." The suggestion struck him like an insult. "This is my house," he said. "No one is forcing me out." She flinched. A mistake, he noted. She was getting careless with her reactions. "They have papers," she said softly. "I saw them." He moved closer, lowering his voice. "You worry too much," he said. "That's always been your problem." Her eyes flicked up to his, then away again. He caught something there. Not fear, not exactly. Calculation. It unsettled him more than anger would have. He turned from her, unwilling to entertain it. Paranoia crept in when control slipped. He would not allow that. He opened a cabinet, poured himself a drink despite the early hour. The burn steadied him. Behind him, he heard the faint sound of a drawer opening upstairs. Packing, already defying him. The thought hardened something inside his chest. This was what happened when people forgot who held the structure together, when they mistook stability for permission. He had built this life brick by brick. He would not watch it be dismantled by paper and fear. He finished his drink and set the glass down carefully. Outside, the engines near the gate went quiet. Time was compressing. He stood there, in the center of a kitchen designed for abundance, and felt the first true flicker of something unfamiliar brush his spine. Not panic, but the recognition that he was no longer alone in his decisions. That others were moving pieces without his consent. That his wife, somewhere in the house, knew things he had not told her. He did not yet understand what that knowledge might cost. But as he climbed the stairs, past half-empty rooms and lingering echoes, he sensed the balance shifting. The house, once obedient, felt watchful now, as if it were listening not just to him, but to her. And for the first time, the man who owned everything wondered what she had been hearing all along. She knew what the walls had heard. She had learned the house before she learned herself. In the beginning, she thought that was what love looked like, adapting, adjusting, fitting into a space already claimed by someone else. The mansion had been his long before it was hers. Its hallways curved to his preferences. Its windows framed views he liked to admire. Even the silence inside it felt tailored, measured, controlled. Over time, she realized the house behaved exactly as he did. It rewarded obedience. It punished defiance quietly. She stood in the upstairs bedroom, folding clothes that didn't belong to her anymore, and listened. The walls carried everything. They remembered arguments spoken in low voices, nights of tension disguised as calm, promises made with conditions hidden inside them. She had learned to press her palm against the drywall when she felt unsteady, as if grounding herself in the truth the walls absorbed when she was too afraid to speak it aloud. She hadn't always been afraid. Once she had been loud, curious, certain that marriage was a partnership rather than an arrangement, but certainty eroded slowly, like water against stone. He never raised his voice. He never needed to. He corrected her gently, explained things patiently, reminded her how much she didn't understand. Over time, she stopped asking questions. It was easier to accept his answers than to endure the quiet punishment that followed doubt. She folded a dress and placed it into the suitcase. Her hands trembled despite her effort to steady them. Downstairs, she could feel him moving. His presence pressed upward through the floors like pressure in deep water. She always knew where he was in the house. She always adjusted herself accordingly. That was how survival worked. The eviction notice replayed in her mind, every word branded into her memory. She had seen it before he realized she had. He assumed she didn't read legal language, didn't understand numbers, didn't recognize lies when they wore expensive suits. He was wrong about many things. He just never noticed. The eviction wasn't sudden. It wasn't bad luck. It wasn't betrayal by partners or a temporary market shift. It was the consequence of choices he had hidden carefully, buried beneath reassurances and distractions. Accounts drained quietly, deals structured to benefit him alone. Risks taken without consent, explained afterward as necessities. She had followed the trail piece by piece, late at night, scrolling through statements she wasn't meant to see. The house had been collateral long before it became a crisis. Her stomach tightened as she zipped the suitcase halfway closed. Leaving fully would make it real. Leaving halfway still allowed hope. She hated that about herself, the way hope clung even when evidence demanded surrender. A soft knock sounded at the door. She froze. "Mom," her daughter's voice slipped inside like breath through a crack. Small, careful, already learning. "Yes," she said, too quickly. "Come in." The door opened slowly. Her daughter stood there clutching a stuffed animal by one ear, eyes scanning the room before landing on the suitcase. Children noticed what adults pretended not to see. "Are we going somewhere?" she asked. The question held more fear than curiosity. Her mother knelt, forcing a smile that felt brittle. "Maybe," she said. "Just for a little while," her daughter frowned. "Dad said we're not leaving." Of course he had. She smoothed her daughter's hair, fingers lingering longer than necessary. "Sometimes grown-ups don't know everything yet." The child nodded, unconvinced. She had been quiet lately, watching. She flinched at sudden sounds. She asked fewer questions. That frightened her mother more than tears would have. "Pack your favorite things," she said softly, "just in case." Her daughter hesitated, then nodded again. She didn't argue. She trusted without understanding, and that trust felt like both a gift and a burden. After she left, the room felt smaller. She sat on the edge of the bed and closed her eyes, letting memory surface. The first time she realized money was being used as control, not protection. The way he questioned purchases framed concern as guidance. The way he insisted on handling finances because it was simpler. The way simplicity always benefited him. She had mistaken management for care. A voice cut through her thoughts. "You packing now?" He stood in the doorway, arms crossed loosely, expression calm. Always calm. Calm was his armor. "I'm organizing," she said. "The room's been cluttered." He glanced at the suitcase. A faint smile touched his mouth, not reaching his eyes. "You're overreacting," he said. "I told you this is temporary." "You tell me a lot of things," she replied. The words escaped before she could stop them. His gaze sharpened. "What's that supposed to mean?" She stood, forcing herself not to retreat. "It means I've seen the papers." Silence stretched between them, heavy and deliberate. "You shouldn't have been looking," he said finally. That was his answer, not denial, not explanation, correction. "I'm your wife," she said. "I live here." "You live here because I provide," he replied. "Don't confuse access with authority." Her breath caught. The sentence landed exactly where he intended it to. "This house is being taken," she said, "because of decisions you made. Because of circumstances you don't understand," he corrected. "And because you're letting fear cloud your judgment." Gaslighting arrived gently, wrapped in reason. "I'm not afraid," she said, though it wasn't entirely true. "I'm prepared." "For what?" he asked. "Running." She didn't answer. Her silence was confirmation enough. His voice softened. "You don't need to protect her from me." The way he said it made her skin prickle. "I'm protecting her from instability," she said. He stepped closer. She resisted the urge to step back. "You're creating instability," he said, "by doubting me, by acting out of turn." Out of turn. As if her life followed an order he enforced. "She's scared," she said. "She hears things." "She hears your anxiety," he replied. "Children absorb weakness." Something inside her shifted, not fear. "Resolve." "She hears truth," she said quietly. For a moment, his expression flickered. Anger threatened to surface before being buried beneath composure. "You've been listening to the wrong things," he said, "and imagining the rest." He turned away, dismissing her with movement alone. "Finish whatever you're doing, we'll talk later." Later meant never. Later meant after compliance. She waited until his footsteps faded before sinking onto the bed. Her hands shook openly now. She pressed them together, forcing stillness. The walls had heard everything. They had heard the lies layered over reassurance, the threats disguised as concern, the plans spoken aloud when he thought no one listened. She had heard them too. She just hadn't wanted to believe them. She reached for her phone and opened the notes she'd been compiling in secret. Dates, numbers, names she didn't fully understand but recognized as dangerous. Proof, not enough for justice, but enough for survival. Down the hall, her daughter's door closed softly. Time was shrinking. She closed the suitcase and slid it under the bed, heart pounding. Leaving now would provoke him. Staying too long would trap them completely. She didn't know which he anticipated more. But as she stood and looked around the room one last time, she understood something with terrifying clarity. He had already decided how this would end. And whatever escape she imagined, he was already moving faster. Eviction day, the morning arrived like a slow drumbeat, neither bright nor dark, just the weight of inevitability pressing down on the mansion. Outside, the sky held a pale, indifferent gray, matching the steel vehicles that had appeared near the gates before sunrise. Time itself seemed suspended, every second stretched taut, every movement magnified. She stood at the top of the staircase, clutching her daughter's hand, feeling the trembling pulse beneath her small fingers. The child's wide eyes mirrored a fear that had no words, and she squeezed them gently, forcing calm she did not feel. Below, he moved with the quiet precision of a man accustomed to bending the world to his will. Each step, each measured gesture radiated dominance, the kind that left no room for resistance. The front door opened. Footsteps, muted but purposeful, echoed across the stone foyer. The couple of men at the gate were unnecessary now. The real threat was already inside. She had sensed it hours before, in the way he had studied her, in the tightness of his jaw, in the cold efficiency of his morning routine. "Go upstairs," he said, voice low but commanding, as if they were still children caught in minor mischief. She hesitated, but the child clung to her side, pulling instinctively toward safety. There was none, she knew it. Every instinct screamed it, but reason could not touch the force that had once been love. He followed. His presence filled the narrow corridor, pressing in on both of them. He had always been larger than life, but now there was something else, finality. The lines of his face were sharp with intent, and in his eyes was the entitlement of a man who had never been denied. "Stop it," she whispered, a small, futile plea. He didn't. He couldn't. This was the culmination of all that he believed the world owed him. His wealth, his control, his legacy, all hung on the edge of his perception, threatened by the very people he claimed to protect. Her mind raced. Escape, concealment, anything to buy a few minutes. She thought of the rooms she had explored in childhood, of small closets, of hidden spaces behind doors that no one used. But time had always favored him. Doors that had seemed protective now loomed as prisons. The daughter clutched her mother's wrist. "Mom," she whispered, small voice tremulous. "I know, my love," she replied, voice trembling but measured. She could not break, not yet. She had to be a barrier, a shield, a conduit of calm for the one she could protect. He moved closer, and the air shifted. Violence was in the space between them, a silent predator stalking the edges of breath. There were no screams, no grand gestures, just the inevitability of force applied by someone who believed it was his right. She tried to speak, but the words faltered. "Please, we can." "Don't," he said sharply, as if cutting the syllables in half could sever them from meaning. His voice was final. There was no negotiation. He had already chosen, long before the morning sun reached the gates. The room was quiet in the way that quiet always precedes irrevocable change. Furniture shadowed the walls, the heavy curtains blocked the outside world, and the mansion itself seemed to hold its breath. She realized then that no structure, no wealth, no legacy could offer protection against the man who had once claimed to love her. Her daughter's eyes met hers. In them, a question: why? But there was no answer. Only a mother's final attempt at sheltering innocence in a world that had already abandoned it. He paused, surveying them with a practiced calm that masked intent. Everything had been rehearsed, every hesitation measured, every resistance anticipated. The moment of execution, the literal and metaphorical breaking of what he had deemed his, was inevitable. The air shifted again, and the act itself, when it came, was intimate. Quiet, precise, the kind of violence that left no trace of chaos, only absence. She held her daughter, whispering soothing words, as the house absorbed the sound of finality in its walls. The rooms, which had once celebrated their arrival with polished marble and curated art, now bore witness to the collapse of a family. Time fractured, seconds elongated. Memories and regrets flitted across her mind like shadows. She remembered the first time she realized her husband's control was absolute, the first subtle betrayal, the calculated silences, the gaslit fear. Now it had reached its conclusion. The mansion, once a symbol of pride, now felt like a tomb. The floors that had echoed laughter now absorbed the final sighs. The walls had heard everything, the whispers, the pleading, the unheeded warnings. And in the quiet aftermath, they seemed to mourn alongside her. She could feel the weight of eternity in those moments. Not fear, not rage, just the clarity of irreversibility. He had owned everything, and now, in the end, he had claimed the only things that truly mattered to her, her daughter and herself. When the first faint hum of engines reached the gates, it was too late. The authorities, the media, the justice that followed, everything arrived after the fact. The truth could be documented. Laws could be written, headlines could scream, but they could not restore what had been lost. She pressed her daughter close, feeling the fragile pulse beneath her small body, knowing that nothing could reverse the damage. The mansion, the wealth, the control, it all lay in ruins, both materially and spiritually. And in that devastation, the final lesson emerged, bitter and uncompromising. Love could be claimed, but it could also be destroyed, and ownership was no substitute for it. Outside, the sky remained indifferent, gray and unyielding. Inside, the walls absorbed the silence once more, a witness to a truth that had come too late. Justice, when it arrived, would stand outside, a hollow echo. And the cost of marital truth, the ultimate price of power mistaken for love, was written in the stillness of the mansion and the absence of those who had once lived within it. She finally let herself breathe, not relief, not surrender, just recognition. Recognition of what had happened and what it meant. That day, the house that had defined them all became a silent monument, a reminder that control and wealth could not protect against the darkness bred within a single mind. And as the gates slowly opened, letting in the world that would never understand the quiet devastation inside, she knew that the story had ended, except that for the living. The aftermath was only beginning.